We'll discuss the awful mass shooting in Austria, the increasingly bizarre war of words going on in the United States over deportations of migrants, and we'll get the inside dope on secret negotiations towards a Gaza peace deal going on in Qatar. All of that, plus the cocaine trade in the English Channel, Reform UK gets a new chairman, and he's got pretty strong views, plus a glimpse of the spending review being unveiled tomorrow. It is going to be a very busy hour. Join me after the news.
On your radio, on the LBC app, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 6 o'clock, Austrian authorities say a former pupil was behind a shooting at a school this morning. The 21-year-old killed 9 people in Graz before reportedly taking his own life. Idan Hanin is a reporter in the city. He's told LBC the children are being helped by professionals.
Some of them are crying and they won't stop crying. Some of them are just standing there being still, asking no questions. They are now being reunited with their parents.
The UK has issued the first sanctions against Israeli government ministers by a Western country over comments they've made about Gaza. Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has previously called for Palestinians to be resettled elsewhere. After LBC revealed frontline workers are being assaulted every 2 minutes in Britain, laws protecting emergency workers are being strengthened. Our analysis revealed last month in the NHS alone, almost 250,000 staff were attacked. The Home Office has now tabled amendments to close a loophole which allows people to get away with some racial and religious abuse of frontline staff. And the Prime Minister insists he's not writing a blank cheque after committing to the Sizewell C nuclear plant in Suffolk. £14.2 billion will be invested in the project, but critics claim it will cost much more. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 20 points at 88.53. The pound buys $1.35 and €1.18. LBC weather, a dry and mostly clear night for much of the UK. Patchy rain around the Western Isles tonight, lows of 3 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Amelia Cox.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. It's 6 p.m. Now, Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Good evening. What a day. A mass shooting in Austria, a war of words in America over the deportation of migrants, and secret negotiations over Gaza. All things we will be covering in the next hour. But before that, however, look up. Look around, and it seems a perfectly ordinary, slightly grey June day, and yet a kind of history is being made today which connects to every single one of us every time we turn on one of the little white switches all around us. Where does the energy come from? Coal? No. Oil and gas from under the sea or from the Americans or Russians? Less and less. Windmills? Solar panels? More and more. But what about nuclear? Once we were pioneers in that industry. This is from 1955.
Cumberland. At Calder Hall, Britain is shaping her industrial future by the building of an atomic power station, the first of its kind in the world. On this site will be created the driving force for industry and light, heat and warmth for the home.
But ever since the early days, there's been a powerful countercurrent against nuclear. Remember all those little metal badges and the T-shirts with cheerful, smiling suns and the words, "Nuclear power, no thanks." Remember the dishevelled marches and the growing worry about how we were going to get rid of the radioactive waste. Remember the panic after nuclear accidents at Windscale, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima. Not so long ago, it seemed as if Britain was close to giving up nuclear power, just as Germany did 2 years ago. But this morning, Britain was told we will be taking a radically different direction, with the announcement of more than £14 billion for a new nuclear power station, Sizewell C, on the Suffolk coast, and small new nuclear reactors to be built by Rolls-Royce in other parts of the country as well. And this is, for a Labour government, quite the moment. Its change of heart has been driven by the realisation that the bigger threat we face isn't getting rid of nuclear waste, it is climate change. And without nuclear, reaching net zero becomes almost impossible. The Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband's one of the more left-wing members of the Cabinet, and yet he told the TUC back in 2009, "I did not grow up in a pro-nuclear family, but the truth is that climate change should change everyone's view about nuclear power. Nuclear power, no thanks, today means climate change, no doubt, tomorrow." Earlier, the Prime Minister noted that our last reactor was built 30 years ago, and he promised no more dithering, no more delay, no more being unclear. Among the electorate, only a quarter now oppose nuclear power, with 42% in favour. Today really does mark a turning point. And so, let's hear first from the Energy Minister, Michael Shanks. Michael, thanks for coming in. Were you, like your boss, originally an anti-nuclear guy?
No, I grew up very close to Hunterston, the nuclear power station in Ayrshire that was powering Scotland for decades. And look, what we've announced today is a golden age of nuclear power, but it also is about saying, as a government, that long-term investment in the future of the country and the energy security of the country and the tens of thousands of good, well-paid jobs that go with it is what we were elected to do. So today we've announced the funding for Sizewell C, but also small modular reactors, these hugely exciting and innovative next steps in nuclear technology. But with it is really just a statement that what we're saying is our energy security is a mix of renewables, the clean power that we need in the future, some of the cheapest forms of power we can generate, but nuclear plays a critical role in that. And instead of what we've had, which is of successive governments actually, but for decades, the dither and delay that you heard from the Prime Minister, we've made a decision today to move forward at pace with these exciting projects and deliver for the people of the country.
Now, I'm not wrong, am I, in saying that the Sizewell C project can only go ahead if there is extra overseas investment? You know, you've put in the £14 billion, or you will put in the £14 billion. We've got EDF, the French company, coming in as well. But beyond that, you need the big pension funds from Canada and elsewhere to put their money in. That hasn't happened yet. When will it happen?
Well, that's why today is so important, actually, because it's a statement of intent that the government backs this programme. That's really important to now drive forward the investment. But yes, we do need other investment.
Guarantee that Sizewell C will happen, does it?
Well, it takes it very, very close to guaranteeing it, and that's what I would say. But we'll say more in the summer when that investment, the capital raise that's going to take place now concludes. We need private investment in this project. But what we've also said is, look, nuclear alongside renewables will help push gas off the system, which is what's driving up so many people's bills, and together will deliver cheaper bills in the long term for consumers right across the country.
These huge nuclear power stations take a very, very long time to build. Have you got any realistic timescale for this, or is it going to be one of those projects that just goes on and on and on, delayed again and again and again, a kind of nuclear version of HS2?
Well, we have got so used to this in this country, but everything we're doing around reforming our planning system and around really driving forward infrastructure on a big scale is about speeding up these projects. But the other thing that's really exciting about Sizewell C is that it's a complete duplicate of Hinkley Point C. So we've learned a huge amount from that project around the design elements, around the supply chains, around the skilled workers that have built that can now be put to work on Sizewell C, and that will give us real confidence about the timescales and the budget.
But I'm not wrong in saying that to make sure this happens, and the small modular reactors from Rolls-Royce we'll talk about in a moment, all of that is going to require changes to the planning system to ensure that kind of protests and planning hold-ups don't destroy the project.
Well, that's going through Parliament today, in fact, is the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which is all about saying, in this country, it's far too slow to build critically important national infrastructure. It takes far too long, it costs far too much. Investors are put off by the uncertainty of just how long it takes to build things. The truth is, as a country, we're going to have to build some big infrastructure in the energy space in particular, but in other aspects of our economy as well. And as a government, we're committed from the Prime Minister down to getting stuff built far faster than ever before.
So, Michael, listening to and hugely enjoying your accent, if I was a traditional supporter of the Labour Party in Scotland and had been a member of Scram, which you may remember, which was the Scottish campaign to resist the atomic menace, Scram, it was all over the place, and I'd voted Labour because I was very excited about the windmills and the solar panels, and I'm fundamentally an old-fashioned environmentalist, and I would hope to protest against this kind of thing. Your message is you have absolutely no chance, get lost.
Well, no, of course, people have the right to protest about all sorts of things. But what I would say is our clean power mission is all about putting fossil fuels off our energy mix. That means nuclear and renewables. It's not one or the other. We're also building at scale wind farms and solar. The two go hand in hand. But the other thing I would say is you raise Scotland, and today is a really interesting moment for most of the UK. But of course, the Scottish Government have this ideological objection to new nuclear. And so while there are parts of the UK crying out, frankly, for SMR technology to come and deliver the well-paid skilled jobs in their community, we've got a Scottish Government under the SNP opposed to that investment. That's a ridiculous position for us to be in. So I'm afraid I'm probably too young to know that particular protest group. But we will deliver, with a Labour government, the change in Scotland that builds new nuclear in Scotland too.
Since you're in the business of whacking your opponents, let me ask you what you think about Nigel Farage's plan to reopen some coal mines, specific coal mines in South Wales, and restart the steel industry there.
Well, I think he's sort of increasingly in the world of fiction and fairy tales. I mean, this is just not credible, and this is what we're seeing quite a lot.
Why is it not credible?
Well, because, look, industry moves on. There obviously was a difficult, with coal mines closing, that's no way we would ever want to do a transition for workers ever again. But that has now passed. Reopening coal mines takes us back to the energy mix of the future. I had the privilege, actually, this is a sort of odd thing as a minister to say, but I had the privilege of being at the closure of Britain's last coal power station at Ratcliffe-on-Soar. We're the first industrialised country in the world to phase out coal completely.
Sad moment in a way.
It was a sad moment for the workers, but it was a really important moment to say we've moved past that as one of the dirtiest forms of energy generation to new nuclear and to solar and wind and all the other clean power that will make up our energy mix in the future.
All right, Michael, thank you very much. We've had a bit of party politics. Let's just kind of move beyond that now and hear now from the chair of Great British Nuclear, Simon Bowen. Simon, in terms of the overall picture of electricity investment around the UK, where does nuclear stand? How important is it going to be compared to all those arrays of windmills we see off the coast and indeed onshore as well?
Well, I think the first thing to say is this announcement today, for those of us who are kind of nuclear professionals that have been in the industry for many, many years, is just a seminal moment. It is a massive shift, and it is giving us the long-term programme that we've said is needed to make that investment. Now, what does that mean for nuclear in the UK and as part of the mix? Well, it doesn't replace windmills or solar farms, but any system has to have firm power which creates inertia in the grid and great stability in the grid, as well as the wind farms and the solar farms.
So is this, I'm sorry to jump in, this in a sense to stop what happened in Spain and Portugal about a month ago when suddenly the whole thing collapsed because there was a problem with the renewables pouring into the system? This would stop that happening here.
It'll certainly contribute to it. Now we don't know exactly what happened in Spain, so all of this is kind of conjecture. But what we do know is that the system was unstable, and the system was unstable because it didn't have large lumps of metal rotating to give stability to the system. Nuclear does that, and multiple, both big reactors and small reactors does that. So it is a mix of energy.
So it gives a kind of resilience to the system.
It does, and it gives firm power from when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining.
Simon, I mentioned earlier on that the long-term protests against nuclear power, and one of the big arguments there is how you deal with the radioactive waste. Now, talking to the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority, or looking at their website, it seems to me we have about 5 million tonnes of radioactive waste to dispose of in this country, store and then safely dispose of. And for, I think, decades we have been talking about, digging really deep into rock and storing this stuff deep underground, and absolutely nothing has happened. Now we're going to create more nuclear waste. How are we going to long-term safely store it?
I think, so the first thing to say, there's a great stat from America which says that if they took all of the nuclear waste from the whole of their programme, they could put it in a football stadium, and at 10 yards high, across the football stadium, that is the total amount of waste for the whole of America. So we have to keep a perspective of the amount of waste that there actually is, because it is not enormous and it is manageable. The second point is that in all the plans that the Nuclear Decommissioning Authority have put in place for the geological disposal facility, the future nuclear waste that will be produced, and it will be less in modern reactors, has been taken into account in their calculations.
So in their 5 million tonnes or so,
yes.
It's already there. That doesn't really answer my point, if I may, however, about when it's going to be safely buried deep in the.
So the nuclear, the nuclear, and you're better off speaking to them about them because they've got the update on when the programme's going to be. But they have a programme to build this facility in the 2050s, and we have the ability to store the material between now and when that is successfully commissioned. So is it a big issue that we worry about? No, it's not, because we know that the plans are in place and we know it's manageable.
All right, Simon, thank you very much. And now let's turn to the company that's in charge of building the small modular reactors all around the country, the chair of Rolls-Royce SMR, Sir Stephen Lovegrove. Sir Stephen, thank you very much indeed for coming in. First of all, for people listening and not fully understanding all this, what is an SMR?
An SMR is it stands for small modular reactor. Small in this context is relative. I mean, they're not that small. They are about the size of, say, Wembley Stadium. They are a great deal smaller, however, than the Hinkley Points of this world or the Sizewells of this world, which are giga plants effectively, but they are small, and the critical difference between them is that unlike one of the very big ones, where everything has to be taken to the site and it is effectively built bespoke at the site, the small modular reactors are capable of being built in factories on a standardised basis, transported on roads in sort of standardised sizes, and then assembled effectively underneath a big cover. So it will then hopefully take away much of the time and the cost expansion that you see in the big ones.
So if, in a sense, they can be mass assembled and then constructed on site, how many do you expect to build in the UK?
At the moment, we are expecting in the UK on current plans to build around 3 of them. 3 of those, 3 small modular reactors would be about the same size as one of the very large ones. And it would power, each one of them would power 1 million homes and be a very significant contribution to our nuclear capacity.
Next question, of course, is who gets first into the grid between yourselves and Sizewell C? In other words, will your SMRs actually be contributing to British energy costs before Sizewell C?
I hope so. We are definitely going to have that as one of our ambitions. We know that the early 30s is when it needs to happen.
The early 2030s.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you know where they're going to go yet?
We don't. I mean, there are a number of sites that the government has which it could ask us to go for. One is in Wilver on Anglesey. One is down in the southwest in Gloucester in Oldbury, but we don't know yet.
But they're still away from, as it were, the centre, the big population hubs of the country. Why? Why not bring them right into where they need it, where the power is needed?
They need to be near plentiful supply of water. So typically these things are placed on the coast. And electricity is obviously fungible and capable of being transmitted. Wilver, of course, did have a big nuclear power station. Yes. So did Oldbury. So the grid connections are already there, and it is quite easy to transport the electricity.
Sort of final question, really. Rolls-Royce has just won a competition for these, so congratulations on that. There were other companies bidding as well. What does it mean for Rolls-Royce? You're one of our most important, top engineering companies. Does this mean that you'll win other contracts around the world for the same kind of SMRs?
Well, I should say that Rolls-Royce SMR has other shareholders in it as well as Rolls-Royce.
We're talking to the Qataris later in the show, so I know that.
It is very important for Rolls. Rolls is obviously an aerospace business, but it is always and has historically always been a nuclear business. There is no question in, I think, anybody's mind that the market for SMRs in the world is going to grow enormously. The whole world will need twice as much electricity in 2050 as it has in 2030. SMRs are going to be a big part of that. We're already in the Czech Republic. We are in the final knockings of a competition in Sweden. There will be other European markets and markets further afield that we will be looking for as well. So we are hoping that it will be a great British export in one of the most important sectors we have.
A very, very big day for your company, Sir Stephen, Simon, but thank you both very much indeed. Now, coming up, a school shooting in Austria by a 21-year-old man has left 10 people dead. I'll be joined by a journalist from the region next, but the time now is 6:18.
This is LBC.
Or over.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Watch live on both Global Player and the new LBC app.
6:20. Austria is in mourning after the murder of 10 people in a school in the town of Graz, where a 21-year-old former pupil went on the rampage with 2 guns before killing himself in a toilet cubicle. It is a terrible story which reminds us that these days nowhere really is completely safe, though it has to be said that Austria has one of the highest rates of gun ownership in Europe. Let's talk next to Fanny Gasser, journalist for one of Austria's largest newspapers, who is currently in Graz herself. Fanny, thank you indeed for joining LBC on this very difficult day for your country. I said that Austria has a very high number of guns compared with other countries, and that's true. But you've also had very, very few incidents, haven't you, in the last few decades? This is quite rare for Austria.
Yes, Austria seems like a safe country. We also don't have any security measures at schools because we are just not known for having school shootings like in the USA, for example.
Do we know anything more about the shooter beyond the fact that he's 21 and he attended the school himself?
Yes. So he's 21 years old. He is from Austria, from the region of Graz. He was a former student, a former pupil. There have been some rumors about him being bullied beforehand, but we don't know the exact details. So that's about all the police can safely say to us.
And it's very difficult, of course, for the whole community. Politicians from across Austria have been arriving in Graz. What do we know about what's being done to support the families of the dead?
So, there has been a press conference with the Chancellor, with the Foreign Minister, Minister of Education, of Interior. Everyone came to Graz and they disclaimed that they're going to cancel all the events for this week. And also there are events at the church for today's evening, and people looking after each other, especially our mayor, who is of the Communist Party, is really looking after the students and the parents.
Good, yes.
Yeah.
When we had a terrible shooting in Dunblane in Scotland, it sparked a big debate about our gun laws, and there were changes made to our gun laws. Are the people in Austria already saying we have to think about the kind of people who can get guns and the availability, particularly of second-hand weapons?
I mean, there's a debate going on all over the world and also in Austria. But for now, today, everybody seems so in shock that these conversations are probably starting tomorrow, and we by now do not know all the details. We know that he was permitted to have guns. He probably had 2 fire weapons. This is also something we know, but the discussion hasn't really started yet.
Well, a really, really horrible and difficult day for your country. Fanny Gasser, thank you so much for talking to LBC tonight. Pro-immigration protests are spreading across America, but the violence we've seen in Los Angeles, thankfully, so far isn't. Yet as the war in the streets becomes a little quieter, the war of words is getting hotter. Here's President Trump speaking in the White House in the last half hour.
If we didn't send out the National Guard, and last time we gave them a little additional help, you would have, Los Angeles would be burning right now. Los Angeles would be not a lot different than what you saw take place in California and Los Angeles just a little while ago. And, you got to remember, we have the Olympics coming, and we don't want people looking at Los Angeles like it would have been. It would have been bad. Last night, they had total control. If we didn't have the military in there, the National Guard, and then we also sent in some Marines. We had some bad people. We have people, they look in your face and they spit right in your face. They're animals. And these are paid insurrectionists. These are paid troublemakers. They're agitators. They're paid.
Meanwhile, Gavin Newsom, the California governor and Democrat described by Donald Trump regularly as Gavin Newscum, said earlier today about Trump's decision to deploy hundreds of elite US Marines to LA, they shouldn't be deployed on American soil facing their own countrymen to fulfill the deranged fantasy of a dictatorial president. Tell us what you really think, Gavin. So what does this mean for American politics more generally? Is President Trump getting what he wants? A big political punch-up covered by all the US networks while he actually fails to deport many immigrants? Let's hear now from Laura Trevelyan, the New York-based journalist who has been following this story closely. Laura, in your instinct, do you think this is good news for Gavin Newsom in terms of his profile across America? Is he beginning to emerge as the most formidable Democratic opponent of Donald Trump?
Well, it's a very difficult moment for him, Andy, because since the beginning of the year, Gavin Newsom has been very much tracking to the centre. He's taken great care until this moment to be conciliatory towards President Trump, greeting him on the tarmac in Los Angeles when President Trump came to LA in the wake of those devastating wildfires. Gavin Newsom has started a podcast, Andy, where he's interviewing leading MAGA figures such as Steve Bannon, a key Trump ally. Gavin Newsom has even gone so far, Andy, as to say that there shouldn't be trans athletes in girls' sports. But now here he is, the person who has been forced into this role of leading, essentially, the anti-Trump resistance, a role that he didn't want to be in, but one that the Democratic base is demanding and the one that the president has put him in the position of because he's deployed troops to a state without the consent of a governor.
Well, let me ask, I know there are big constitutional arguments already raging about President Trump's right to send in the National Guard, never mind the Marines. But what about the argument that he's actually getting exactly what he wants, which is a big sort of televised argument about migration at a time when it's actually quite difficult to find and deport as many migrants as he said he would?
Absolutely, Andy. And these images of protesters waving Mexican flags on top of burnt-out vehicles, if you look on the feeds of the White House, of conservative commentators, this is the image that the president wants. Immigration is his strongest issue. That's what the polling shows. Since he took office, people have been very much behind all the actions he took at the border, where immigration is down. But you're right, there's a subtext here. These riots in LA, and here is the risk for the president in overreach. The riots have been sparked by the fact that people who are not criminals, other than being in the US illegally, are being arrested at Home Depot, day laborers, outside convenience stores. So it's not the violent criminals, the president said that he was going to go after, who are here illegally. In order to meet their target of arresting 3,000 people suspected of being in the US illegally a day, ICE, that's Immigration Customs Enforcement, have been directed to go after people whose crime is just being here. So families are being split up. That's what sparked this. So it's a delicate moment.
Laura, thank you very much. You lead me on perfectly to my next interview because I'm going to talk to the former head of that US organisation sparking all the protests with raids across Los Angeles, John Sandweg, who is director of the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, under Barack Obama. Mr. Sandweg, thank you very much indeed for talking to us tonight. In your experience, is it actually possible for ICE to apprehend and take into custody the numbers of people that President Trump is talking about without there being serious disorder?
You know, Andrew, as we're seeing that these kind of tactics, the tactics that are necessary to get even close to this 3,000 arrests a day, certainly at the current manpower, the resources that are available to ICE, it is incredibly difficult to do that without triggering a lot of this civil unrest. And very quickly, the undocumented population in the United States, the demographics tell us, the data tells us that 75% of them or so have been here 10 to 15 years or more. They're integrated into our society. They have U.S. citizen children. They have U.S. citizen spouses. The problem is, though, for the ICE to get after these large numbers, they have to do indiscriminate type operations where they go hit these work sites where you find a large numbers of people going into work, or you flood these hardware stores, these Home Depot parking lots, and round up the day laborers who are waiting outside. We saw what happened when they engaged in those tactics in L.A. It triggered these protests on the street. But for ICE, at the current manpower, to get anywhere near these quotas the administration's putting on them, these are the only type of tactics that they can utilize to get those arrests.
So it's a pretty brutal thing that, in a sense, President Trump is doing to ICE, never mind anybody else. It's making it an almost impossible job. But let me be clear what you're saying. If I was a very recent migrant who was working for one of the drugs cartels, or I had been in America for 15 years and I was working as the widely beloved and tax-paying proprietor of a restaurant, it doesn't really matter. I'd be equally likely to be lifted and taken away.
Yeah, more likely, to be honest with you, Andrew. So look, the really bad guys, your violent felon, he doesn't punch a clock at the local apparel store, right, or at the warehouse. He's not showing up on a 9-to-5 job. He's making his living engaged in criminal activity. So when this administration started, ICE was engaging in those type of tactics where they would be looking for those individuals, using intelligence, using criminal justice system records to find that individual might be in the U.S., build a targeting plan, go out there and make that arrest. Trump did it a little differently. He lowered the standards, so anybody who had any brush with the law was a fair target. And if you found some undocumented migrants along the way, you were able to grab them as well. The problem, Andrew, is that is slow, painstaking work. Getting criminals is always slower. The higher the quality of the apprehension, the lower the quantity. You just put more man hours in finding those hard to find people. That wasn't satisfying the administration, and they put the pressure on ICE to shift their operational tactics to go with more indiscriminate raids. But where you look at that. Yeah.
I'm sorry, John, to jump in, but that means that he's putting ICE employees in harm's way. And a lot of people are now saying that actually these scenes of chaos on some streets in Los Angeles, not all of Los Angeles, but some streets, is exactly the kind of image that he wants to project to his MAGA base of, the danger of the outsider. What do you make of that?
I certainly and I'm not a political expert, and I don't know what the real goals of the administration are. I certainly think they like these optics. They certainly seem to be drawing more attention to the circumstance. And I agree. I think writ large, the administration likes to present Democrats as standing up for undocumented immigrants who are committing crimes, and whereas he's fighting to get them removed. I certainly think you're also right that in terms of his longer-term ambition, as it relates to deporting 1 million people, that's just frankly impossible, given the resources that ICE has available to it, but also really given the Supreme Court's mandate that immigrants in the United States get due process before they're deported. That's a separate story. The administration is trying a lot of different things to work around those due process mandates. But yeah, this is about, they're not going to hit their 1 million. But I will say, Andrew, I think one other element of this is I do think the administration's larger goal as well is they know they can't deport 12 million people. They want to put pressure on the immigrant communities to get people to leave. They're not shy about saying that. But there's this thing that, self-deportation element to this as well. Put pressure on the migrant communities, create fear. People will voluntarily leave the country. Problem solved.
Well, problem not solved yet, of course, but Mr. Sandweg, that was really, really interesting, and I'm very grateful of you joining LBC tonight. Enjoyed that very much. Now then, LBC has had a sneak peek into the Chancellor's spending review for tomorrow, and it is good news for commuters in England. Find out why next. But the time now, 6:32, and Amelia Cox has your news headlines.
One more person has died following a school shooting in southern Austria. It brings the number of people killed in Graz this morning to 10. The gunman is also dead. The Foreign Secretary has accused 2 Israeli government ministers of inciting violence as he announced sanctions. Israel says the measures against Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich are outrageous. And the Energy Minister has told LBC today's announcement comes very, very close to guaranteeing the Sizewell C nuclear plant will happen. Speaking on Tonight with Andrew Marr, Michael Shanks says the government is still seeking private investment after committing £14.2 billion. LBC weather, dry and mostly clear night for much of the UK. Patchy rain around the Western Isles tonight, lows of 3 degrees.
As demands grow for more funding in defence, policing and the NHS, how will Chancellor Rachel Reeves attempt to balance her books in this week's spending review?
Security for working people, renewal for Britain. That is the government's mission in a changing world.
We are moving to warfighting readiness as the central purpose of our armed forces.
Tomorrow, stay with LBC throughout the day to hear the spending review live and in full. Plus, we'll get expert analysis and, of course, get your reaction.
This is all madness. These people don't live in the real world.
The Spending Review. Continuous coverage all day. Tomorrow on LBC.
Vodafone.
Tonight with Andrew Marr. Listen on your smart speaker. Just say, play LBC.
6:35. Now, LBC has been given an exclusive peek into the spending review tomorrow. The Chancellor will announce an 18-month extension on the £3 bus fare cap on all bus routes across England. LBC's political correspondent, Aggie Chambray, is here with the details. This will be of great importance to families up and down the country.
Indeed, we've talked a lot about the winners and losers of tomorrow's spending review, and I think it is fair to say commuters will be one of the winners. So, as you say, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, will extend the £3 bus fare cap for another year and a half until March 2027. Now, ministers had already committed to doing it for the rest of this year, but not further than that. And you'll remember last year when it got increased from £2 to £3, it was quite a big row. So I think this will be a sigh of relief for lots of people. It can save thousands of passengers up to 80% of their fare on some routes. I mean, you started the show by talking about billions of pounds for Sizewell C.
Huge numbers, yeah.
Huge numbers, but that may not even be built for another 10 years and may seem elusive to a lot of people listening. This will be tangible to lots of people. This will directly affect their pay packet and will feel like a genuine win for lots of people who are getting the bus every single day.
You almost get the impression this is a government who've had a bit of battering at the polls and have decided generally to make nice.
It does feel a little bit like that, although I think there are definitely going to be some losers tomorrow. But it's interesting that it kind of shows how difficult I think it is to take away caps or benefits when they're in place. For example, with winter fuel, which of course we talked about a lot yesterday.
Absolutely right. Well, you're going to be with us all day tomorrow, I think, Aggie, as we look through the numbers. It's going to be a very, very big day. But for now, thank you very much indeed. Now then, it may be small geographically, but Qatar has become one of the most important fixers and investors around. The tiny Gulf state is the world's fifth wealthiest country and has a $1.3 trillion stake in Britain, supporting more than 600,000 jobs here. But perhaps more important even than that, it's at the centre of the secretive peace negotiations between Israel and Hamas over Gaza and with the Russians over Ukraine. It's all very sensitive, it's controversial. Israel says Qatar is too close to Hamas, but the country is a kind of pivot the rest of the world seemingly can't do without. As the British government announced sanctions against two extremist members of the Israeli cabinet, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the security minister, and the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, I was joined a little earlier in the studio by Dr. Majid Al-Asari, advisor to Qatar's prime minister and the official spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there, and he gave me his reaction to the sanctions announced by the British government today.
Well, Andrew, we've been advocating for the need for a push towards peace in this issue, and one of the main things is we need to sanction the voices for hate on all sides. The radicalization of a generation is undergoing as a result of this war, and it's our place in the world today to stand against anyone who would call for displacing of peoples, call for genocide, or call for anything that goes against international human rights law.
So you would regard what Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich has said as inciting extremism, as David Lammy has said, and indeed inciting genocide?
I think, the facts speak for themselves. This language cannot be accepted in the international community. We are at a day and age today that we cannot hear something like this being said by a government official that represents a government that is a member of the UN, that is a signatory to international human rights declarations, and it is appalling that such words can be said, and we commend the UK government for their decision, and we hope that other governments follow suit.
What can you tell me about the negotiations still going on between the Palestinian side and the Israelis about the ceasefire? Because everything seemed to be blocked. The last American proposal seemed to have been blocked by Hamas.
Well, we are continuing with our efforts along with our partners in Egypt and the United States. As you know, we've been doing this for more than 18 months now. We've reached two pauses, one for a week and one for 40 days, but that's it for the past almost 2 years. What we are doing right now is we're trying to get technically to a point where there is agreement on the technical details. But to be honest, Andrew, we all know that it's not the technical discussion that is making it difficult to reach a resolution. It's a political decision that needs to be taken, and it's the international community's role today to apply the right pressure on both sides to come to the table in earnest and come to a conclusion to this issue.
This is a very complicated situation, but to try to make it simple, as I understand it, the original proposal was that it would be a 60-day ceasefire, and during that ceasefire, the Israelis would release Palestinian prisoners, and the Palestinians would release both the deceased and the living hostages in stages. But the Americans say, no, the Israeli hostages have all to be released in the first week. And the Hamas fear is that means that Israelis simply go full scale to war again after that's happened. Is there any way through that blockage?
Well, Andrew, I can't comment on the specificities of the discussions that are taking place right now. What I can tell you is that for sure there are technical ways of getting to a deal. But again, it's the political decision, the political environment around the decision to end the war, to end the conflict, to find a way out of this. And I think there are a lot of discussions that are taking place, even in New York next week over the two-state solution. The international community is beginning to change its narrative toward this, and more consensus is building. A consortium for peace is building internationally to end the war. But we are not out of the woods yet.
A difficult question, perhaps, but do you believe yourself that there will be a peace deal?
I have to believe it. I can tell you that for all of us working on this, for more than 2 years now, especially with the chief negotiator on this being our prime minister, the only way forward is to see a peaceful way out of this war. And if that doesn't happen, when you hear about all hell breaking loose, it has already for the people in Gaza and for the region beyond that. And we need to find a way out of it immediately. There's no time to waste for a generation that's being lost as a result.
And what's your own reaction when you hear Donald Trump talk about turning Gaza into a kind of resort of casinos and beachfront hotels and so forth?
If we can transform the whole of the Middle Eastern region into a prosperous Riviera, that would be certainly a dream everybody wants to accomplish. But that has to be done by the people in our region. It has to be a sign for prosperity and hope for the people of the region, and it's something that it's eluding us right now with the current parameters.
Now, I have to ask you, Prime Minister Netanyahu has accused Qatar of hosting Hamas and being too close to Hamas. What's your reaction?
Well, we've always said this and faced the same criticism when we were asked by the United States to open a channel with Hamas in 2006. We knew that at one point somebody will use this against us, but we can't shy away from talking to those who can bring about peace and different connection. This is a very new thing in international politics, Andrew. You've been covering this for decades and you know it. The fact that you can't speak to your enemies, you shouldn't speak to your enemies, is a new fact that has been making it very difficult to create peace. And our goal is to make sure that we talk to anybody.
You speak to everybody. And in the same way you speak to the Russians about the Russian-Ukraine war, and I think your government has been working particularly on the position of the kidnapped Ukrainian children who have disappeared from Ukraine into Russia. Their families desperately want them back. Have you made any progress at all with the Russians on this?
Yes, you know, we came into this situation as we started working on a possible mediation between both sides from day one. We dispatched our Prime Minister over there and he talked immediately to the Russians about the possibility of Qatar leading a mediation. When we found this caveat on the humanitarian side with the children, we immediately got to it. We work on it case by case. These children, a large number of them, of course, a lot of these children have been displaced from their families, don't have direct families, and we take them in patches and bring them back into Ukraine and to their families through our diplomats who receive them in the embassy in Moscow and then drive them out of Russia and into Ukraine. We applaud both sides for agreeing to work on this very positively, and we see it as a success story in a very difficult situation international today. Every kid is a success story. Every kid going back to his family is the most important thing in that kid's life.
Absolutely right. As I said at the beginning, your country invests trillions of pounds and supports hundreds of thousands of jobs in the UK. Do you regard the UK today under this government as a good place to invest in?
The numbers speak for themselves. You know, between 2018 and 2022, around 3.1 billion has been generated in Qatari investments, through Qatari investments here in the UK. We not only believe in investment in the UK, we believe that the UK is an economic partner on all fronts, which we have been working with very closely on a lot of things, including working together on renewable energies and working together on developing new technologies and AI.
Well, you're involved, I know, in Rolls-Royce, who we've been talking to as well, on the modular nuclear reactors. Do you think that the UK needs to invest heavily in infrastructure to get the growth that we haven't had so far?
Well, you know, this is a government that came in with growth as a banner to their agenda. And for us, you know, in Qatar...
We haven't seen much of it so far, I have to say.
We have been always about growth. So it's music to our ears when we hear it. And we're willing to invest very highly in the vision of the UK when it comes to its economy. And, it's in our immediate interest for the UK economy to prosper.
Well, there is a cheerful note to end on. Dr. Ansari, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to LBC.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Another LBC exclusive next. Our reporter Joseph Draper, who's been given rare access to a Home Office-funded police boat, reveals a scandal in the English Channel which is not about illegal migrants. South American drug cartels have dumped more than £200 million worth of cocaine into the Channel, wrapped in waterproof flotation devices with GPS trackers to be picked up by small boats and then brought ashore. Joseph joins us now.
Well, Andrew, I've been on one of the Home Office funded boats patrolling Poole Harbour here, looking for any suspicious vessels which may be involved in international drug smuggling. And that's because the South Coast has become increasingly an entry point for cocaine dropped off in the Channel by South American drug cartels. We've been shown photographs by the Home Office of some of these drugs wrapped in plastic, attached to life jackets so they can float in the water with LED lights, even GPS trackers. The idea being, Andrew, these are thrown overboard and then small British boats come and collect them, bringing them back to the coast where they enter our streets. Now, we have seen a sharp increase, Andrew, in the amount of cocaine brought into the country this way. £200 million last year taken by the border force. Now, that is compared to none taken in this way just 2 years previously. And I've been speaking to Tony Saggers. He's a former NCA intelligence chief. He tells me this is a growing national security risk.
The money gets laundered. That's often corrupting our infrastructures. You know, they're corrupting our seaports and airports. That becomes a security issue. Gangs that are then buying the cocaine are feuding. Those feuds not unusually involve the use of violence and intimidation and thereafter weapons to resolve those feuds. And if we're going to sort of take it right down the line, some of that cocaine ends up in the crack cocaine market. That takes us to a different supply chain that we commonly call county lines. And that commonly recruits and exploits children and vulnerable adults as a workforce.
And we know, Andrew, this is just a fraction of the total amount likely to have been dumped in the channel. This is just the cocaine that Border Force have intercepted. But a senior source there did tell me this afternoon, Andrew, that they are becoming more effective at cracking down on these gangs. To give you an example, they took in 1.5 tonnes of cocaine in a single haul found on a large ship coming from South America. Now, that is over a third of the total amount taken in the previous 12 months. So that just gives you an idea, of Andrew, of just how quickly this issue is shot up and how determined Border Force are to shut it down. I'm LBC's Joseph Draper reporting live.
Joseph, thank you very much indeed for that. Paternity leave is back up Parliament's agenda this week as the group Dad Shift prepares for the world's first dad strike tomorrow. I'll be joined by the co-founder in just a few minutes, but the time now is 6:49.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
David Lammy has announced sanctions against 2 members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, an act of virtue signalling idiocy or a principled stand.
Ian Dale on LBC. Apply. Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
6:51. Reform UK has a new chairman, the broadcaster David Bull, a long-time supporter of Nigel Farage and an early Brexiteer. LBC's Henry Riley was in the room when he was unveiled, and he's spoken to him since, and he's with me now. Henry.
That's right. The ex-star of Most Haunted is looking for skeletons in Reform UK's closet. Of course, David Bull, the new chairman, formerly a Conservative. He was one of David Cameron's A-list back in 2009. But as you say, he's been very loyal to Nigel Farage ever since. Now, he was previously the deputy leader alongside a man called Ben Habib. And for listeners who don't know, the two pretty unceremoniously fell out. And Nigel Farage said he'd rather swallow razor blades than have Ben Habib and Rupert Lowe back in the party.
But I think he's talking to Ben Habib today, is he not?
Well, this is the thing. Dr. David Bull, the new chairman, told me that he'd be, as you say, picking up the phone to him.
I haven't spoken to him, but actually he's also on my list to ring.
Oh, really? To say what?
Of course, just to say hi.
Yeah? Will he come back into the party? Would he be welcome back?
You'd have to ask him that, but obviously I would like to have a conversation with him and to talk about... Look, we've been through an awful lot together, so I went up campaigning for him, for example. He was a brilliant member of the European Parliament. We have enormous history. So, look, the party is changing and evolving, and so let's see what happens.
That is certainly at odds with Nigel Farage, who is not a fan of Mr Habib, nor Mr Habib of him. He's told me in the last few minutes, Ben Habib, that in a slightly ruder way, that certainly would not be happening, his return to the party. Now, the press conference, despite the fact it was about Dr David Bull, was dominated by Nigel Farage, and Ed Miliband on LBC earlier today was speaking about Nigel Farage's speech in Port Talbot yesterday with regards to the blast furnaces there and sort of reinvigorating coal in Wales. When I put Ed Miliband's comments to Nigel Farage today, he didn't hold back. Ed Miliband was on Nick Ferrari's show this morning and said you were telling fairy stories, you don't understand coalfield communities, and that you're playing people for fools. I just wondered if you had a response to... I know you've got some of your favourite politicians here. Ed Miliband's, I imagine, one of them as well.
Very funny. I went to a working man's club 300 yards from Ed Miliband's constituency office in the northern bit of Doncaster. And I went into that club a few years ago. It was full of ex-coal miners, and, you know, some were full-on Scargillites and others wanted to have a debate. It was very interesting. And I said, oh, how often has Ed Miliband popped in? Never been in. If you think Ed Miliband understands former coal mining constituencies and their people, I'd like to see a head-to-head between Lee Anderson, who's worked down the pit, and Ed Miliband discussing the facts of life.
But Andrew, the takeaway from today, a new chairman of Reform, Dr David Bull, he's also said that he's against the burqa, very much on brand with the parliamentary party.
And somebody we're going to see and hear a lot more of, whether we watch Haunted House or not. Henry, thank you very much indeed for that. Now then, British fathers often get a bad rap, but honestly, it isn't always our fault. Sarah Owen, the Labour MP who chairs the Women and Equalities Committee in the Commons, says that Britain has one of the worst statutory leave offers for fathers in the developed world. The maximum of 2 weeks paternity leave is, she says, completely out of step with how most couples want to share their parenting responsibilities. On cue tomorrow, an organisation called The Dad Shift is holding what it says is the world's first dad strike. Dads and non-birthing parents are being encouraged to ask their employers for time off to either pick it or pick up, protesting outside government buildings or simply doing the school or the nursery run. George Gabriel from the Dad Shift joins me now. I am going to make the obvious joke, George, which is that I think my wife would say I've been on dad strike for the last 50 years or so by working. But this is a serious point. This is fathers who really want to be engaged, particularly in their younger children, and are simply not allowed to by our employment laws, and you know, I guess individual companies can do more or less what they like. So what is the problem?
Absolutely. So we're going on strike tomorrow, not to get out of doing our fair share of work, but to get into doing it. The UK's paternity leave system is the worst in Europe. We offer new dads just 2 weeks on less than half the minimum wage. If you're self-employed, you get absolutely nothing. So this is a kind of shockingly bad system, worst in Europe, where the European average is actually 8 weeks at full pay. So we're miles off the pace, and this is really damaging for mums, dads and kids too.
And above all, the children, yes.
Absolutely. So the strike tomorrow is basically Father's Downing tools. It's saying, you know, from the day that our children arrive, we're forced into this choice between spending time with our kids and providing for our families. And that pressure never lets up. You know, the £187 a week you get on paternity leave's barely enough to buy a buggy. So for one afternoon, we're saying, all right, let's get a couple of hours off from our employer and let's go pickle day by their mums. For dads who can't make it into London, let's make a statement about the role we want to play in our kids' lives.
That Labour MP, Sarah Owens, made a very important point when she said simply, you know, society has changed. The days when we expected children to be looked after by their mums and barely recognise their fathers are long gone, and the laws have to change. To what extent are individual companies stepping in where the state has not yet? In other words, are there companies around the country who are much more flexible and much more generous to new fathers?
So there are about 800 major employers across the country offering enhanced paternity leave. I work for one of them. I'm very fortunate to be given 4 months paternity leave for the arrival of my daughter a couple of years ago and my son just 10 weeks ago. So there are companies who are stepping forward. They recognise there are big gains in terms of productivity, recruitment, retention. But the challenge here is that while the big players can do that and reap the benefits, the SMEs, you know, the pub down the road, really struggle to get there on their own. And that's why we need government step in and provide an improved statutory offer so that they can level the playing field and businesses across the country can do the same.
So what exactly will you be doing tomorrow?
Well, I'm going to be taking my two little kids with my wife down to DBT, and we're going to show up. And we've been making placards at home, and we've got
DBT.
the Department of Business and Trade. Yeah. So they are the department ultimately responsible for the UK's parental leave system. So yeah, we're getting ready. We've been practicing our nursery rhymes, and we're getting ready to make a fuss.
It'll be very interesting to watch it. Do you think there are ministers who are actually pretty sympathetic to what you're doing?
Absolutely. So Labour have committed to a review of parental leave, and that is really their opportunity to prove that they're on the side of working families and working fathers. I'm very lucky to be working with an amazing group of about 40 Labour MPs, all of whom are actively campaigning to improve paternity leave. And it's a real opportunity for government to do the right thing and to benefit by doing so.
I often end the show on a light note, but today I'm not going to, because there's an awful lot of evidence that today's children are having a much harder time in many ways in terms of mental health and stress and anxiety about the world around them than previous generations. Now, do you think the lack of fathers around, the lack of fatherhood, is part of that?
Well, and this is a super topical conversation in the wake of adolescence, which I watched. I'm sure you all did, and many listeners at home will have. There's a really important study that's just been conducted in Australia. 16,000 men followed over a 10-year period. It's a representative sample. And the one thing that is found to radically reduce the likelihood of any of those men going on to be in a role to play in helping raise healthy boys and men, but also wider kids too.
A really important note to end on. George Gabriel of Dad Shift, thank you very much indeed for coming in and talking to me. I'll be back with you tomorrow. If you've missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinion, put your news categories in the order you'd prefer them, pause and rewind live radio, and listen to a range of podcasts. Download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Coming up at 10 on LBC, it's Ben Kentish. But right now, it's time for Ian Dale.
Thanks, Andrew. Today, the British government announced sanctions against two members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, an act of virtue signalling idiocy which renders our future influence on Israel null and void.